The air in Atlanta was thick, and not just with summer heat. It was the kind of heaviness you feel when too many grudges have been left unresolved, when every smile is hiding a scar, when every conversation is one wrong word away from erupting. The cameras started rolling, and instantly you could see it in Scrappy's face. This wasn't the man audiences had grown used to. The jokester, the peacemaker, the one trying to lighten chaos with a smirk or a playful jab. That night, everything about him had shifted. The jokes were gone, the patience drained, and the body language said it louder than any confessional could. He was finished. He wasn't about to carry another man's grudges. He wasn't going to smooth over another family's problems. He was done. For years, producers at VH1 had thrived on this exact tension, feeding off it like vultures circling over roadkill. The feud between the Frosts and the Harrises had been milked season after season. Every reunion ended in shouting. Every trip abroad turned into a battlefield. Even something as innocent as a birthday dinner spiraled into mudslinging. And every single time, somehow, some way, Scrappy was dragged into the storm. He didn't ask for it. He didn't thrive on it. But he was always there, tugged between friendships, caught between loyalty and peace, watching his own sanity chipped away piece by piece. Once upon a time, he tried to fix it. He begged them to squash the beef, reminded them that Atlanta was big enough for all of them to live without colliding every week. But peace doesn't trend. Drama pays, and the producers knew it. They let it fester, let it boil, until it became a monster no one could tame. That night, Scrappy sat back in his chair, scanning the room like a man who finally realized he had been screaming into a void. Nobody was listening. Nobody cared about the weight he carried. They just wanted another explosion for the cameras. And then, calm but sharp, he finally broke the silence. I don't ever want y'all to feel like I'm picking sides. I just want people to be in a good space. But it's like every time we plan something, we gotta ask, do we invite the Frosts or do we invite the Harrises? His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. That wasn't just about a vacation or a dinner party. That was about grown adults turning every gathering into a war zone and dragging everyone else down with them. Mendeecees. Harris bristled, defensive before the words even landed. His voice cracked with frustration, and you could hear the years of bottled anger spilling out. He reminded the room that when he slipped, when he made mistakes, the entire cast piled on top of him. But when Yandy Smith slipped, she had an army of women covering her, excusing her, protecting her. We can't win, he said, his tone raw and tired. It wasn't just about marriage. It was about the double standards in their circle, about the way men carried scars that women were allowed to heal from. Whether people agreed or not, the exhaustion in his voice was real. And then there was Kirk Frost, standing with the arrogance of a man who thought history couldn't touch him. If hypocrisy had a face, it would have been Kirk's in that moment. This is the same man who embarrassed Rasheeda on national television, who dragged her through scandal after scandal, who fathered a child with Jasmine Washington while the world watched. Yet there he was, wagging his finger at Mendeecees, lecturing another man about loyalty, as if his own marriage wasn't still limping from the damage he caused. It would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. Scrappy's eyes narrowed as if to say, "You gotta be kidding me." But the wildest part? Rasheeda was still right there, unwavering, standing by her man's side like stone. Loyal to the end. Loyal to a fault. Her loyalty was admirable, but it also made her look blind, complicit in the same hypocrisy dripping from Kirk's every word. In the corner, young Jock was doing what he always does, cracking jokes, tossing out side comments, trying to keep the mood light. But every joke was laced with truth, and every truth made the fire burn hotter. He didn't realize that by carrying whispers from one side of the room to the other, by repeating the wrong line at the wrong time, he was tossing gasoline on a blaze that was already out of control. And who ended up paying the price every single time? Scrappy. Jock laughed. Scrappy suffered. That's why the shift that night was different. Scrappy leaned back, his voice steady but laced with exhaustion. I be tired, man. I'm tired of this. Y'all keep dragging this out like it's never gonna end. We grown. Handle y'all problems without putting me in it? The silence that followed was heavy. For once, silence meant more than screaming. No one expected him to check Kirk Frost like that. Not on camera, not with Rasheeda glaring across the table. But he didn't flinch. He wasn't here to protect anyone's ego anymore. He said the thing everyone had been afraid to say. This feud was dead weight, toxic, and pointless. The power of his words came from the calm delivery. No yelling, no storming out, no tantrum. Just stillness. And that stillness was scarier than any scream. Because when a man like Scrappy, a man who's lived through betrayal, divorce, custody battles, and public humiliation, finally says he's done, you believe him. His silence wasn't weakness. It was final. And everyone in the room felt it. But old habits die hard. Instead of listening, Kirk deflected, pointing his finger back at Mendeecees like a magician distracting an audience. Rasheeda stayed stone cold, refusing to admit that maybe her husband had no ground to stand on. Mendeecees bristled again, his defenses rising. Yandy held her pride like armor. And Jaw cracked another joke, too nervous to sit in silence. Everyone was so locked into their own defense that they missed the moment. They didn't see that Scrappy had turned into a mirror, and what reflected back at them was ugly. The cameras caught it all. The sighs, the nervous glances, the way no one knew where to look after Scrappy spoke. For once, this wasn't about who skipped whose party or who cheated on who. This was about a man refusing to play the fool any longer. His last words of the night were low, but they echoed like thunder. This beef is tired. Handle yourselves before you come at anybody else. And that's when the question shifted. Would anyone actually hear him? Would Kirk Frost realize that his skeleton screamed louder than his lectures? Would Mendeecees admit that his marriage battles had become a circus dragging everyone else down? Would Rasheeda and Yandy recognize that their loyalty, while noble, was also gasoline on the fire? Or were they too addicted to the storyline, too drunk off the spotlight to care? Because here's the thing, Scrappy wasn't bluffing. The look in his eyes wasn't for cameras. It was a man who had nothing left to give. If that meant walking away from the drama, from the cameras, from the friendships, he would. And if he did, then who would carry the dirty laundry between the Frosts and the Harrises? Without him, the middleman was gone. The bridge was burned. That silence didn't end with the night. It lingered, stretching into the days after, until the next time the group gathered. And when they did, the aftershocks were clear. Everyone had heard the whispers about Scrappy checking Kirk Frost in front of cameras. Everyone walked into the room expecting a storm. Rasheeda arrived first, polished as ever, standing tall by her man like no wound had ever touched her. Kirk followed, chin high, pretending he hadn't been humiliated, clinging to pride as his shield. That was his specialty. Pretend the blow never landed, act like he was still in control. Then came Yandy Smith Harris and Mendeecees Harris, their presence shifting the energy instantly. She carried herself like a queen who wouldn't bend, while he walked with tension coiled tight, jaw locked, eyes blazing. And finally Scrappy entered, quiet, calm, but sharper than anyone in the room. He didn't need to explode anymore. His silence was sharper than a knife. The room froze when Scrappy and Kirk locked eyes. There were no fake hugs, no handshakes, just a stillness that told everyone the storm hadn't passed. It had only been waiting. The moment Scrappy and Kirk Frost locked eyes, the room froze. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from politeness. It was the kind that carried history, bruised pride, and unspoken words. Scrappy sat steady, his expression firm, while Kirk leaned back in his chair, smirking like he always did when he wanted to look unbothered. But the truth was clear. Everybody knew Kirk was still stung from being checked on camera. His pride wouldn't admit it, but his body language gave him away. The night started with shallow conversation, music, business updates, kids. It was all filler, the kind of small talk people use when they're just waiting for the real blow to land. And as expected, it was Kirk who cracked first. He leaned forward, dropped a sly comment about loyalty, and sat back as if he'd just laid down wisdom. He didn't name names, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. Scrappy didn't blink. He leaned in, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut. Loyalty don't mean nothing if you ain't loyal to yourself first. Don't talk to me about loyalty when you ain't even handled yours at home. The words landed heavy. Rasheeda stiffened immediately, her lips pressed tight, her silence betraying more than any defense ever could. Yandy Smith glanced between the men, her eyes wide, one hand covering her mouth like she couldn't believe Scrappy had gone there. Mendeecees leaned back in his chair, smirking quietly, clearly relieved that, for once, the spotlight wasn't on him. And young Jock tried to cut the tension with a weak laugh, mumbling under his breath, "Here we go again," but it only made the silence louder. Kirk's pride forced him to respond. He straightened his shoulders and fired back, his voice tight with anger. "Don't get it twisted. I don't answer to you. I built mine, I kept mine, and I don't need nobody telling me how to run my household. The words sounded strong, but the edge in his tone betrayed how deep Scrappy's dart had hit. Everybody in that room remembered his scandals, remembered Jasmine Washington, remembered how Rasheeda cried on national TV while Kirk begged for forgiveness. His history wasn't just gossip, it was public record, and Scrappy had just cracked it wide open again. Scrappy leaned back, shaking his head slowly, no need to add more. The look alone said everything. Clean your own house before you lecture anyone else. And that look was worse than words. It was final, it was sharp, and it was humiliating. The cameras caught every reaction. Rasheeda's face tight as stone, her silence louder than an argument. Yandy's sharp inhale, torn between wanting to defend her man and not wanting to get dragged deeper into someone else's war. Mendeecees, smirking like a man who finally saw someone else carry the target. And Jock, realizing too late that his nervous laugh had only made him look foolish. By the time the night ended, the damage was done. The Frosts left first. Kirk whispering harshly to Rasheeda as she kept her expression cold, her silence once again her shield. The Harrises followed, their pride intact on the surface but their nerves rattled underneath. Jock stayed behind, cracking jokes no one laughed at, replaying in his head how the scene would look on camera. And Scrappy? He sat calm, collected, a man who no longer had anything to prove, a man who had finally dropped the weight of being everyone's messenger. That shift unsettled everyone. Because without Scrappy in the middle, there was no balance, no buffer. The Frosts and the Harrises would now have to face each other head-on. And when years of grudges collide with unchecked pride, the explosion doesn't just loom, it becomes inevitable. The next gathering wasn't just tense, it was suffocating. Nobody in that room walked in blind. Everyone already knew what had gone down, and everyone carried it like armor. The Frosts arrived first, Kirk Frost strutting with his chest out as if nothing in the world could dent him. His smirk was glued on, his jacket sharp, his energy screaming control. But beneath that pride, you could see it. His eyes shifted too much, scanning the room, bracing for impact. Rasheeda followed, as polished and loyal as ever. Her face gave nothing away, but silence was her language, and her silence said she had learned how to carry humiliation like a crown. Not long after, the Harrises walked in. Mendeecees Harris moved like a man carrying grudges carved into his skin. His jaw was tight, his shoulders heavy, and every step felt like it was aimed at Kirk. Beside him, Yandy Smith lifted her chin higher than usual. She wasn't just walking into a room, she was declaring her place in it. Her eyes scanned every face, daring anyone to test her loyalty or her pride. Together, they were a wall, but walls crack too, and everyone could sense it. And then came Scrappy. He didn't need to walk in with noise. He didn't need to posture. His presence alone shifted the air. He was calm, but it wasn't peace, it was a warning. His silence carried weight heavier than words, and the message was clear. He wasn't the middleman anymore. If they wanted to fight, they'd have to do it face to face. The first few minutes dragged with fake small talk. Music, kids, business ventures. But everyone knew it wouldn't last. Pride doesn't let silence live for long. And as expected, it was Kirk who cracked. He leaned back, smirked, and let out another slick line about loyalty, about finding out who's really solid when the cameras are off. It wasn't direct, but the shade was thick enough to choke on. Scrappy leaned in, steady and sharp. Loyalty don't mean nothing if you ain't even loyal to yourself first. Don't talk to me about loyalty when you ain't even handled yours at home. The room froze. Rasheeda stiffened instantly, her lips pressed so tight it looked painful. Her silence was a shield, but everyone could see the wound beneath it. Yandy let out a sharp breath, muttering something under her breath that the cameras didn't catch, while Mendeecees leaned back in his chair, smirking at the blow aimed at Kirk. And young Jock? He tried again to play the clown, tossing out a nervous joke to ease the heat, but it died in the air. Nobody laughed. Kirk's pride pushed him forward. Don't get it twisted. I don't answer to you. I built mine, I kept mine, and I don't need nobody telling me how to run my household. His voice was sharp, but there was a crack buried inside it, a tremble he couldn't hide. Because everyone remembered. They remembered the tears, the scandals, the betrayal. His history wasn't whispers, it was documented for the world. And Scrappy's words cut through the facade like glass. Scrappy didn't need to say another word. He leaned back, shaking his head slowly, eyes locked on Kirk as if to say, You've already lost this argument. That look alone burned deeper than anything else. By the end of the night, the walls had caved in. The Frost stormed out first, Kirk whispering sharply into Rasheeda's ear as she held her face stone cold, refusing to give the cameras the crack they were hunting for. The Harrises left next, their heads high, but their energy rattled. Yandy walked out fast, her heels clicking like gunshots, while Mendeecees followed close, muttering under his breath. Jock lingered, making weak jokes no one acknowledged, realizing too late that once again he'd look like the clown when the footage aired. And Scrappy? He didn't move. He stayed seated, calm, collected, a man who had burned down the role everyone tried to force on him. He wasn't carrying whispers anymore. He wasn't fixing other people's mess. He was done. And that was what terrified them most, because without Scrappy in the middle, there was no buffer left. The Frosts and the Harrises would have to face each other directly. No shields, no mediator, no excuse to hide behind. And when years of betrayal and pride crash into each other with no one to absorb the blow, the explosion isn't just possible, it's guaranteed. The cameras cut to black, but the tension didn't stop. It followed them out of the building, into the cars, into the quiet of their homes. And by morning, it was all over the timelines, clips spreading, fans dissecting every look, every silence, every word. The internet had already chosen sides. Some backed Scrappy for finally breaking free. Others defended Rasheeda's loyalty, while others dragged Kirk for daring to lecture anyone about loyalty. But underneath all the noise, one question lingered like smoke after fire. If Scrappy was really done, if he had truly stepped out of the middle, then who would be left to hold the line when the Frosts and the Harrises finally went to war?